Today is officially 5.2, and today it's about absolute values. Now, we do a big unit on this in higher algebra, and it's also in the top 20. It's buried in a problem like this. Because there's no absolute values there, but when you square root this, it brings in the absolute values, in case you've forgotten that. But absolute value is something we've practiced in the top 20s, and it's something you're supposed to know from last year. But I could very easily see a kid forgetting. How about this? That 4 and that -1, they can be combined together, can't they? And what do they make? 3. So that's 3. Positive 3. Those are gone. And then I can start the process of actually subtracting and solving this thing. But I do want to remind you, in the whole, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, is this the order you solve equations in? No, it's the reverse. If you've never noticed that before, we're going to start with adding or subtracting to get this thing solved. I want to get that alone. I'm going to start with adding and subtracting. See, that's at the bottom. Once you're done with all the add subtracts, you move up to the multiplies divides, and then eventually at the end, what's the last thing? Parentheses. What are like parentheses? The absolute values. So really what this parentheses should be is grouping symbols. Because we know a lot of them that act like parentheses, like absolute values or parentheses with a squared on it, you know. So. All right, did you get it down to -3 is equal to 3x minus 2? And then you divide by 3 and get -1 equals absolute value x minus 2. Raise your hand if you got that far. Okay, good. Now, do you remember what to do when you have absolute values? Break it in 2 parts. Boom, boom. One of them is x minus 2 equals, and by the way, you do it where you just take the absolute values out. Act like these just disappeared, and you write down what you have left. X minus 2 equals -1. And then you do it the same exact way as you just did it. X minus 2 equals, but then you put a negative of whatever the number was. Negative of -1, which in this case would make +1. So the only difference between this equation and this equation is that one of them has the negative and one of them doesn't. Pausing for a second on the video. So I now add 2 to both sides, and I get x equals 1, and add 2 and add 2, and x equals 3. I never broke any of the rules, but did anybody notice something strange about these answers? Would you actually trust these answers with your life? Like, are there times? Yeah, people sometimes build their own planes. You know, your life depends on you making that thing work right. If it fails when you're up in the air and the wing breaks off, it's going to be bad. Well, how would you check to see if you did it right? I'd put them back in the original and see if they work. All right, I'm going to do something that's kind of in between. The original is really big and messy. I'm going to at least put it back in here and see if it works. So if I put in a 1, it's 1 minus 2 is -1. Absolute value of -1 is not -1, is it? That one did not work. Let's try the other one. The other answer was 3. 3 minus 2 gives you 1. Absolute value of 1 comes out to +1, and it's not -1. It's not working. All right, so moral of the story. You have some weird things that are going to happen in this unit. One of which is you're going to get answers like this that don't work. Do you remember what they are called? You cross them off and write what? Maybe this is your first time then. It's called extraneous. EXT. Here's the thing though. If you don't actually have the answer, see, some kids think they can just say, oh, there's no solutions. Because they hear from somebody on a test, oh, the answer for one of these is no solutions. And they're like, I have no idea, but I'll just write no solutions. But Mr. Server, I said there was no solutions. Okay, you have to find the solutions that would have been right, and then check them, find out, oh, they don't actually work. Sometimes what's going to happen is one of the two of them does work. All right, so bottom line, check yourself. All right. Another weird thing that can happen sometimes, and it ends up happening today. If I had to solve this, and I subtracted the x's from both sides, what if all the variables disappeared? That does not mean that it didn't work. 2 is equal to 1 plus 1. 2 is equal to 2. What in the heck is going on? What's the answer? All real numbers work. If you come out to something that's a true statement, like 2 equals 2, it's just saying that this was identical to this, and therefore it didn't matter what you put in for x. You could put in anything, and it would work. We're not used to that answer. That's a weird answer, isn't it? Let me give you another one that's like that, but different. Would you please, in the middle of a problem, you're going to hit something like this, 2 plus x is equal to 1 plus x. Would you please solve that? Take a second, solve it. You know my top 20? That was the 20 most important things of the 202 things that you've learned since kindergarten. You've learned 200 math skills since kindergarten. This is one of them that you ran into probably only once. It's on my list of 202 things. 2 equals 1? What? Whenever you solve it and you get all the variables out of there and it's equaling a false statement, take a guess what that means. There's no solution. There's no way to make it work. There is no number that you could put in for x. We're not used to that. There's almost always an answer, but you can't put in a number like -1 and make it work. There's no number that would work. Okay, so if it comes out to a false statement, that means no solution. All right, moving on. What does absolute value really mean? It means a distance. So if I asked you what's the absolute value of -7, what I'm really asking is what's the distance of -7? If I said I lived a really short distance from the gas station, do you think would it even make any sense if I said, oh, I'm only -1 miles from the gas station? You would never say a negative. What's the smallest distance that there could be? 0. You're at the gas station. Okay? So, what I'm trying to say is, that's the absolute value of -8. What does that really mean? What's the distance of -8? Distance from what? The gas station? No. The distance from 0. And can there be a negative distance? Nope. That's why the answers always come out positive. Or what is the possible answer that's not positive? Absolute values can have an answer that's not positive. Can't be negative. 0. 0 is not positive. All right. So you can have a 0 or you can have a positive answer to these. But you cannot have an answer come out negative. And that's what that problem we just did, it had that in there. I don't know if you even noticed, but in the middle of that other problem, it was saying that an absolute value equal to negative. I'll show you. Right here. In this part of the problem, cleaning up some stuff here. Right here. That's impossible. Absolute values can't equal negatives. Right there, you could have noticed that, okay, this is one of those weird ones where I'm gonna get answers that don't work. Could you stop the problem right there? Nope. You should finish the question, get the answers, and label them as extraneous. They're answers, but they're answers that don't really work. I'm gonna pause for just a second. Back to math. The extraneous finger. Ask your kid about it. All right, so this is a list of things that are true about absolute values. I'll give you some highlights. Like, for instance, if I had the absolute value of 8/3, if you wanted to, You could break that up into the absolute value of 8 over the absolute value of 3. It's not a big shocker. One that's a little weirder than that is if you had the absolute value of x to the 6th, and then you wanted to take the power outside, you could. It'd be the same. Okay, there's a few other little gems in here if you want to look them through. You can break up absolute values into 2 multiplies. Like absolute value of 6 is the same as absolute value of 2 times the absolute value of 3. Just some interesting little factoids about absolute values. All right. One of them, by the way, is the thing that tells us we have to split it into 2 parts and solve the equations. But I've already gone over that in a lot of detail, so I'm not going to talk about that much more. Oh, one more. If this ever equals c and c is negative, then there's no solution. That's what we were also talking about before. All right, moving on. This is kind of your bread and butter kind of problems. Would you please, let's go with number 3. It's got a couple steps first before you break it into 2 parts. Do number 3 right now and show your work, and I'm going to pause for a second while I walk around, make sure you get how to do it. Do number 3. Other than an occasional putsy little algebra mistake, looked like most of you knew what to do. You start by adding 5. I'm dividing by 3, so I saw a lot of 5/3 on the paper. That's good. And then I got, this is the moment where you split it into 2. Not all of you were there when I got there, but you weren't there yet maybe. But you should split it into 2. X plus 1 is 5/3, and x plus 1 is negative 5/3. Now, I personally like to clear fractions. I hope that whenever you see fraction problems in this class that you think, oh, it's an equation with a fraction. I'm going to get rid of the fraction. Therefore, multiply by what? Multiply by 3. That gets rid of the fraction. If you haven't learned this yet, learn this. Oh, sorry. I read it wrong. Thank you. Okay. 2x plus 1. 2x plus 1 is equal to 5/3. And I'll move it over. Whoa, what just happened? There, move that over. And 2x plus 1 is equal to negative 5/3. Now I'm going to multiply everything by 3. Times 3, times 3, times 3, times 3, times 3, times 3. And then I now have 6x plus 3 is equal to 5. And 6x plus 3 is equal to negative 5. And again, easy to solve from there. Do you get that there was a fraction in the problem? As soon as you see, oh, fraction in the problem, multiply by the denominator. It's got to be a rule for you. All right, there's this one. That confuses a lot of people. Let me break it into 2 parts. And if you get the first part, the second part's easy. How do you get the first part? You just drop the absolute value. It's like it's not there. Absolute value is gone. X equals x squared minus 6. Well, how do you get the other equation then? Yep, and make sure you distribute it. Like you said, you don't just make the first one negative. Don't just make that one negative. You have to make them both negative. So I'm going to say negative of x squared minus 6. And yeah, distribute it out. Negative x squared, negative 6 means plus 6. Now, this is a bit of a pain. You mean I have to remember how to solve a quadratic? Yeah. First thing, set it equal to 0. And if you can factor it, you should. These both factor. See if you've got strong factoring skills or not. Setting it equal to 0 means get one side to be 0. 0 equals x squared minus x minus 6. That factors. This one. 0 equals negative x squared minus x plus 6. That factors too, but I want to give you a hint. Please factor out the negative 1. If I were to make a second top 20 sheet, this would be on the secondary sheet. Know how to factor out negative 1. It's really, really hard to factor with a negative right there. A 12-minute warning went off, so I should get you into your homework soon. See who's good at factoring. Row 6, third person. That's you, JS. Did you get this black one factored here? Excellent. What'd you get? You are so right. And then the answers are as simple as each of these parts has to equal 0. So x plus 2 equals 0, so x equals negative 2. And x minus 3 equals 0, so x equals 3. 3 and negative 2. That was the easier side. How about this factoring out a negative 1 thing? I hope you get that changes everybody's sign to the opposite. And then I can factor it easily. X and x. And can anybody do it? If you know it, say it. Is it plus 2 and minus 3? No, that was this one. Plus 3 minus 2. Very good. And if you're like, oh, people are good at that and I'm terrible at factoring, you need to fix that. This is the class where we can fix that for you. The top 20 thing would have been a reminder that your factoring is bad because it's all over the place on the top 20. If you're bad at factoring, let me help you fix that. You got to come in the morning sometime though. It'll take us a little while, but let's tune that up. Factoring is a big deal from now on in math. X equals negative 3, x equals positive 2, and that means there's 4 answers. These two and those two. Sometimes when people ask, why is pre-calc like so much harder for kids? There was like 12 steps to solving that thing, and there's 4 answers. That's one of the reasons it's harder. It's not always that the concepts are that hard. It's just look at all that algebra. And that's why I want you to be good at the top 20. If you've been one of those kids that's still resisting it, you only got like 9 out of 20 down. It's like an anchor that you're trying to run a marathon with. Let's get that anchor off of you. Come in and get some help. All right. So let's look at the homework together. On this one, these 4 are going to be really pretty easy. I hope they are. These kinds sometimes confuse people. All you got to do is drop the absolute values, write it out, and then make the same exact equation except the right side has to have a negative distributed to both parts. And I warned you, there's going to be some that come out to no solution. Okay, moving on. This page, the ones that are important to me are the ones that have the quadratics, so we're going to just skip that one. So 14 and 15. Make sure this is typical pre-calc. You take something that you've done before, which is absolute values, and you make them harder by taking something else you've done before, quadratics, and putting them together. All right, moving on. This one, it is not impossible. What was that rule again I said? Just drop all the absolute values. And see what you get. And then you have to do something else. Number 16 is tough. You may skip everything after that. The whole rest of the assignment you can skip. Okay? Get it up through number 16. Do all of those. And it'll make a huge difference. All right. That's all I got for you for today.